It was a Friday night in the fall of 2019, in a community center on the south side of Chicago. One of those neighborhoods where the streetlights flicker more than they shine, where the corner stores outnumber the grocery stores 3-1, and where the dreams of kids get buried sometimes before they even get a chance to breathe. The parking lot was cracked and patched with old asphalt. But inside, something rare was happening. The folding chairs were filled. Every single one. The city had brought in a touring stage magician. A man by the name of Gerald the Great Harmon. He wasn't David Blaine. He wasn't Penn or Teller. But he had a website, he had a business card, and he had a backdrop that read Harmon Magic, where the impossible becomes real. He'd done shows at corporate events in downtown Chicago, at birthday parties for rich kids in Lincoln Park, and occasionally, as part of a community outreach grant program the city ran, he'd come south of the Loop to perform for the kids who didn't get those birthday parties. He was a decent man in his own way, but he had a habit, the kind a lot of people have without realizing it. The habit of lowering expectations for certain rooms. The audience that night was mostly kids between the ages of 8 and 16, with a scattering of parents and community center staff. Some of the parents were still in their work uniforms, scrubs, vests with company logos, shirts with name tags. They'd rushed here after double shifts. They'd made sandwiches in the car. They'd come because their children had begged to come, and because in this neighborhood, a free Friday night event that wasn't dangerous was something you didn't pass up. In the fourth row, slightly off to the left side, sat a 12-year-old boy named Marcus Webb. He was thin. He was wearing a hoodie that was just a little too big, probably a hand-me-down from an older cousin, and a pair of sneakers that had been cleaned so carefully they almost looked new. His grandmother had brought him. She sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, a woman in her late 60s who moved slowly but watched everything with the sharpest eyes in the room. Her name was Dorothy, but everyone called her Miss Dot. Marcus was quiet, the kind of quiet that teachers sometimes mistake for disinterest, but was actually something else entirely. It was concentration. He watched everything with a stillness that was almost eerie for a 12-year-old. While the other kids around him were laughing, nudging each other, checking their phones under the seats, Marcus sat forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his dark eyes tracking every single thing Gerald Harmon did from the moment the man stepped on stage. Because here's what nobody in that room knew, except for Miss Dot, and she was the kind of woman who kept other people's secrets better than she kept her own. Marcus Webb had been teaching himself card magic for 2.5 years. Not from YouTube tutorials on a brand new tablet. From a single book he'd checked out of the library so many times the librarian had finally just told him to keep it. A 1987 copy of The Expert at the Card Table by S.W. Erdnase. Spine cracked, pages soft from handling. He'd read it in bed with a flashlight. He'd practiced in the kitchen while Miss Dot cooked. He'd practiced in the school bathroom during lunch. He'd practiced until the cards moved in his hands the way breathing moves in a body. Automatic, unconscious, and absolutely essential. Gerald Harmon opened the show with a big energy entrance. Spotlight, smoke machine, dramatic music. The kids went wild. He did a rope trick, a color-changing silk handkerchief, a levitating card. All solid, crowd-pleasing stuff. The younger kids were squealing. Even the teenagers, who had arrived doing their best to look unimpressed. But Marcus wasn't squealing. Marcus was studying. He clocked the angle on the rope trick. He caught the thumb palm on the silk. And on the levitating card. A beautiful piece of showmanship that had the whole room gasping. Marcus quietly, without saying a word to anyone, identified the invisible thread and the hidden needle tucked behind Harmon's lapel pin. The magic wasn't in the trick, Marcus would say much later. The magic was in knowing where not to look. And once you see where they're pointing you, you can always find what they're hiding. The show built toward its midpoint, a card selection routine. Harmon called it the impossible location. He asked for a volunteer from the audience, someone who would pick a card, sign their name on it in bold black marker, and watch it get shuffled back into the deck. Then, after Harmon placed the deck on the floor, spun around 3 times, and waved his hand dramatically, the signed card would appear face up on top of the pile. It was a good trick. A really good trick. The room held its breath. And Gerald Harmon, warming to the moment, smiled out at the crowd and said something he probably thought was harmless. The kind of offhand comment that people like him made in rooms like this one without thinking about what it meant to the children sitting in those folding chairs, children who had spent their whole lives being underestimated. He said, "Now I know what you're all thinking. You're thinking, how does he do that? Well, let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. This took me 23 years to learn. 23 years of study, of practice, of training. This is not something just anybody can do." A pause, a smile, eyes sweeping the room. This is real magic. There are moments in a person's life, especially in the life of a child who has learned early that the world is not always generous. When every voice inside you tells you to stay quiet, stay in your lane, don't make yourself a target. You've seen what happens when people like you reach above what the room has decided you deserve. You've watched it your whole life. You've learned the lesson in 100 different ways, from 100 different directions, and by the time you're 12 years old, the lesson is so deep inside you it doesn't even feel like a lesson anymore. It just feels like the truth. Marcus Webb had heard that voice his entire life. He heard it in the hallways of his school when the advanced track teachers looked at him and then looked away. He heard it in the grocery store when the security guard's eyes followed him and not the white kids walking past. He heard it in the silences that fell when certain adults realized whose grandson he was, what neighborhood he came from, what his last name meant around here. That voice was old. That voice was tired. That voice had been working overtime for generations. But on that Friday night in that community center on the south side of Chicago, something happened in Marcus Webb's chest that he would spend years trying to describe accurately. It wasn't anger exactly. It wasn't pride exactly. It was something quieter and more dangerous than either one. It was the simple, cold, undeniable recognition of the truth. He knew something. He knew it in his hands, in his bones, in 2.5 years of silent, solitary, disciplined work. And Gerald Harmon, a man who had just implied that this room full of children was incapable of understanding real skill, was standing 20 feet away, doing something Marcus could not only do but could do better. Miss Dot felt it before she saw it. She said later that she felt the change in the air next to her, the way the air changes just before someone decides to jump. She turned to look at her grandson, and she saw his jaw set in that particular way she recognized. The way it set when Marcus had made up his mind about something and nothing on earth was going to unmake it. She put her hand on his arm. Not to stop him, just to let him know she was there. Marcus raised his hand. It went up slowly, deliberately, with a calm that was almost more startling than the gesture itself. Not a frantic wave, not a nervous flutter. A single arm, extended, perfectly still, cutting straight up into the air like a small dark flag being planted in territory that had just been claimed. Gerald Harmon was mid-sentence, basking in the applause for his impossible location trick, when one of the community center staff members, a young woman named Keisha who was standing at the side of the stage, caught his eye and nodded toward the fourth row. Harmon looked over. He saw the boy. Thin kid, big hoodie, arm in the air, serious expression. Gerald Harmon. Yes? You in the back. You have a question? The room turned. 40, 50 faces swiveling toward Marcus. Some curious, some already half smiling in anticipation of whatever awkward thing a 12-year-old was about to say to the magician. Some of the other kids were already covering their mouths. You know, the energy, the kind that lives in a room when someone is about to either do something amazing or embarrass themselves completely, and the crowd isn't sure yet which one it's going to be. Marcus stood up. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait to be told he could stand. He just rose, and there was something in the way he rose that made the half-smiles in the room get a little uncertain around the edges. Marcus Webb. I can do that. The card trick you just did. I can do it. And I think I can do it faster. For seconds of complete silence. Then the room exploded. Not in applause, not yet. In noise. In reaction. Kids turning to each other, mouths open. The teenager 2 rows back said, "Oh, he did not." Someone laughed. A parent said, "MMMMMM." The community center staff member Keisha pressed her lips together in an expression that was half, "Oh no," and half, "Oh yes." Gerald Harmon looked at the boy for a long moment. He was a professional. He knew how to handle hecklers, how to handle challengers, how to handle the kid who wanted to show off in front of his friends. He'd done this 100 times. He smiled, and it was a particular kind of smile, one that adults use when they want to be patient with a child who doesn't yet understand their own limitations. Gerald Harmon. You can do the card trick? This card trick? Son. I've been doing this for 23 years. Marcus Webb. Yes, sir. And I've been doing it for 2. Another wave of noise. Louder this time. Harmon's smile didn't waver, but something shifted just slightly behind his eyes. A microscopic recalibration. The kind a performer makes when they realize the room has just become something different than what it was a moment ago. He spread his hands in a gesture of gracious invitation. The universal showman's move for come on up. Let's see what you've got, kid. And he said the 5 words that would change that night forever. Gerald Harmon. All right then. Come on up. Miss Dot exhaled. She didn't say a word. She just unfolded her hands in her lap and watched her grandson walk to the front of the room. There is a particular kind of cruelty that lives inside laughter, the kind that doesn't know it's being cruel. It's the laughter of a room that has already decided what the story is, already decided who the hero is and who the punchline is, and is simply waiting for reality to confirm what it has already concluded. It's not mean-spirited, exactly. It's worse than that. It's automatic, reflexive. It happens before anyone has a chance to think about what it means to the person on the receiving end of it. That was the laughter that filled the community center when Marcus Webb walked up to the front of the room. Started small, a snicker here, a giggle there. Then it spread. By the time Marcus reached the edge of the stage area and turned to face the audience, a full third of the room was laughing. Not mean laughter, not targeted laughter, just the laughter of a crowd that found the situation inherently funny. This skinny kid in the too big hoodie and the careful sneakers, standing up in front of a professional magician and saying he could do it better. Come on, that's funny. You have to admit, that's a little bit funny. Marcus let them laugh. He stood there and let it move over him like weather. His face was still. His hands were at his sides. He did not smile to try to win the room's approval. He did not look down at the floor. He did not look to Miss Dot for reassurance, though he knew she was there in the 4th row, watching him with those sharp, quiet eyes of hers. He simply waited for the noise to settle, the way a person waits at a bus stop. Not impatiently, just alert, ready for the thing that's coming. Gerald Harmon was a showman, and showmen know how to milk a moment. He turned to the audience with a warm, conspiratorial smile and said, "Well, let's give this young man a chance," which, in context, functioned less as encouragement and more as a cue for a second wave of affectionate, patronizing applause. The kind of applause that says, "Oh, how adorable. The little boy wants to try." Harmon crossed his arms, took a step back, and gestured at the deck of cards sitting on the small table at center stage. Gerald Harmon. It's all yours, son. Show us what you've got. And don't worry, we won't judge too hard. More laughter. Marcus heard it. Of course he heard it. You don't stop hearing things just because you've decided not to react to them. But there was something happening in Marcus's body in that moment that had nothing to do with the laughter and everything to do with what came next. A kind of gathering. Like water collecting in a low place before it becomes a river. Like the moment before a storm when the air pressure changes and the birds go quiet and every living thing can feel what's about to arrive. There was a boy in the 3rd row. A big kid, maybe 14, someone Marcus recognized vaguely from around the neighborhood, who called out, "Bruh, sit down." And this produced the biggest laugh yet, not because it was particularly clever, but because it crystallized what the room was already feeling. This kid had no business up there, and it was only a matter of seconds before he figured that out and went back to his seat. One of the younger kids near the front, a girl of maybe 9 or 10 in pigtails and a glittery shirt, looked up at Marcus with an expression of pure, undisguised pity. The kind of pity that children sometimes show more honestly than adults allow themselves to. She shook her head slightly, like she was watching someone walk into traffic. Marcus looked at the deck of cards on the table. Bicycle Riderback Standard. Red. Standard poker size. A good deck, actually, better than the beat-up practice deck he used at home. He picked it up, and the moment his hands closed around the deck, something in his body changed. Something that the audience couldn't see but would very shortly be unable to ignore. His shoulders dropped a half inch. His breathing slowed. His eyes, which had been focused somewhere in the middle distance, sharpened. Every nerve ending he had, every neuron in his 12-year-old brain, had been waiting for this exact weight in his hands. 2.5 years of practice, 10,000 repetitions, 20,000, more than he'd ever counted. All of it lived in his palms and fingers like a second language, like a second heartbeat. The laughter hadn't stopped yet. It was still rippling through the room. But in the moment Marcus's hands closed around that deck of cards, it had already become irrelevant. A sound from another world, a world he had just stepped out of. He didn't look at the audience. Not yet. He looked at the cards. He cut the deck once, twice, 3 times, not in a showy way, just to feel it the way a musician runs a quick scale before performing. Checking the weight, checking the slip, familiarizing. The movements were so small, so quiet, that half the room didn't even notice them. The other half noticed but didn't understand what they were seeing. Not yet. Gerald Harmon was watching from 6 feet away, arms still crossed, smile still in place. But somewhere in the back of his professional mind, some alarm, faint, not yet urgent, had begun to sound. Because he had done enough shows in enough rooms to know the difference between a nervous kid fumbling with a prop and a person who has handled that prop before. And the way this boy's hands moved over that deck of cards was not the way of a nervous kid. It was not the way of a fumbler or a pretender or someone running on bravado. It was the way of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The laughter in the room had begun, almost imperceptibly, to change pitch. Marcus spoke for the first time since coming to the front of the room. His voice was quiet, not because he was nervous, but because he had never needed volume to command attention. He had learned this from the cards themselves. The most powerful moves in card magic are invisible. They don't announce themselves. They simply happen, and then the consequence of their happening, the impossibility, the gasping inexplicability of the result, does all the announcing that's needed. Marcus Webb. I'm going to need somebody from the audience. Somebody who doesn't know me. Somebody I've never met. He scanned the room. His eyes landed on a man in the second row. A heavy-set man in a FedEx delivery uniform who had the general air of someone who had not expected to be participating in anything tonight. The man blinked. Marcus nodded at him once, a small, courteous nod. The nod of someone who has already made a decision and is simply informing you of it. Marcus Webb. Sir, could you come up here? The FedEx man, whose name, it would come out later, was Robert, looked around as if expecting someone to tell him he wasn't really being asked. Nobody told him that. He stood up, to the amusement of the people around him, and made his way to the front. Marcus handed him the deck. Not with a flourish. Just handed it to him the way you hand someone a tool you need them to hold for a second. Marcus Webb. Shuffle it. As many times as you want. Take as long as you need. Make sure you're satisfied it's a completely random deck. Robert shuffled. He shuffled with the particular enthusiasm of a man who has been given permission to really commit to a task. Overhand shuffle, riffle shuffle, another overhand. He took a good 45 seconds. When he handed it back, he looked at Marcus with an expression of mild defiance, as if to say, "There, kid, let's see what you do with that." What Marcus did with it was this. He held the deck face down in his left hand. He asked Robert to cut the deck anywhere he liked and look at the bottom card of the top portion. Not to show it to anyone, not to say it out loud, just to look at it and remember it. Robert did. The room watched. The room still had its amused face on. But the amusement was getting a little complicated around the edges, because the way this kid was running this sequence was not the way of someone winging it. It was structured. It was controlled. It had the architecture of experience. Robert confirmed that he had his card. Marcus took the deck back, squared it, and then, and this is the moment the room began to genuinely shift, his hands started to move. Later, people would struggle to describe exactly what they saw. The words kept being inadequate. Fast wasn't right. Fast implies hurry, and there was no hurry in it. Smooth was closer but too passive. What it was this, a human being operating inside a skill set the way elite athletes operate inside theirs, not thinking, not calculating, simply doing, with the kind of absolute economy of motion that only comes from years of dedicated, obsessive, loving practice. The false shuffle was so perfect that 3 adults in the front rows who had some passing familiarity with card magic would later swear, genuinely swear, that the deck had been thoroughly mixed. It had not been. In the 12 seconds that Marcus's hands moved through that shuffle, he had brought Robert's card to a position in the deck that was precisely 3 cards from the top, and he had done it while appearing to do the complete opposite. Then came the control sequence. Then the double undercut. Then, and this is where a 14-year-old girl named Destiny in the 6th row pressed both hands over her mouth and made a sound that was half gasp, half laugh. The one-handed fan, full deck, blooming open in Marcus's right hand like a flower opening in fast forward, and held there perfectly, every card visible, for exactly 2 seconds before snapping shut. Gerald Harmon uncrossed his arms. It was a small movement. He probably didn't know he'd done it. But several adults in the room noticed it, and they would remember it afterward as the moment they understood that what was happening in front of them was not what they had expected. Marcus set the deck on the table face down. He looked at Robert. Marcus Webb. Tell me your card. Robert. 7 of diamonds. Marcus turned over the top card. 7 of diamonds. The room didn't explode immediately. There was a delay of maybe 2 full seconds. The kind of delay that happens when people's brains are processing something that doesn't match the category they had filed the situation under. Then Robert stumbled back half a step and pointed at the card. Then the girl in the pigtails, the same girl who had been shaking her head in pity, screamed. Then the room came apart, and Marcus Webb stood in the center of it all, hands at his sides, face perfectly still, waiting for the noise to settle. Because he wasn't done. That was the thing nobody had prepared for. The logical expectation, the story the room had written in its head, was that the kid would do one trick, the crowd would go wild, the magician would shake his hand graciously, and everyone would feel good about the night. A nice moment, a fun little upset, something to talk about on the drive home. But Marcus Webb didn't sit down. He asked for a second volunteer. A teenage girl this time. A girl named Amara, 16 years old, who came up with the skeptical swagger of someone who had decided she wasn't going to be fooled. Marcus smiled at her for the first time all evening. Not a performance smile, a real one, because he loved this, the resistance, the determination not to be deceived. It was his favorite kind of audience member. The ones who paid attention. The ones who were trying to catch him. He let her inspect the deck. Let her shuffle it herself. Let her choose any card by touching the face-down backs. Truly free choice, no force, no influence. She chose. She looked. She remembered. She watched Marcus like a hawk watches a field mouse. And it didn't matter. Her card, the 3 of clubs, rose to the top of the deck in a sequence so clean, so technically invisible, that Amara literally looked at her own hands afterward, as if suspecting that her hands had somehow betrayed her without her knowledge. The room had gone very quiet. Not the quiet of boredom. The quiet of people who are genuinely trying to understand something and cannot. The quality of attention in that community center had transformed completely. The folding chairs that had been producing a constant small symphony of scrapes and creaks. People shifting, adjusting, leaning to talk to their neighbors, had gone still. Every eye was fixed on the 12-year-old boy in the too big hoodie. Gerald Harmon had moved. He was no longer standing behind and to the side of Marcus in the posture of a gracious host indulging a young guest. He had drifted forward, slowly, without fully realizing he was doing it, until he was standing nearly shoulder to shoulder with the boy, close enough to see the mechanics if there were mechanics to see, and there weren't. He could not find the mechanism. He was a professional with 23 years of experience, and he was standing close enough to reach out and touch this child, and he could not find the move. Marcus did it a 3rd time. Different method entirely. Same impossible result. A woman in the back row, one of the mothers who'd come straight from a hospital shift in her scrubs, made the sound that people make when they see something that genuinely breaks their model of how the world works. A long, involuntary exhale of pure bewilderment. Then Marcus did something that took the breath out of every person in that room. He held the deck up in front of him. He looked out at the audience, all those faces, some laughing, some stunned, some with tears in their eyes for reasons they might not have been able to fully articulate, Reasons that had as much to do with the neighborhood and the year and everything that word representation means when you've spent your whole life not seeing it. And he said quietly, "Marcus Webb, I'm going to do it 10 times. And I'm going to do it faster each time." He did it 10 times. Each time a different volunteer. Each time a different method. Each time cleaner and faster than the last. By the 7th iteration, he was performing with one hand behind his back. By the 9th, he was doing it while maintaining eye contact with the volunteer the entire time, never looking at his hands once. By the 10th, the reveal took less than 8 seconds from the moment the volunteer named their card to the moment the card appeared, face up on top of the deck. 8 seconds. Gerald Harmon, in his polished version of the same effect, took 45. When the 10th volunteer confirmed the card, an old man, maybe 70, who had come with his granddaughter, and who stood there shaking his head and laughing a laugh that was pure joy, pure disbelief, pure delight, the community center erupted. Not in the polite, good-natured applause that had greeted Gerald Harmon's tricks. In something uncontrolled and real, the kind of noise a crowd makes when the impossible happens in front of their eyes and their bodies respond before their brains catch up. The teenager who had said, "Bruh, sit down," was on his feet, screaming. The girl in the pigtails was jumping up and down holding her glittery neighbor's arm. Keisha, the staff member, was bent forward with her hands on her knees laughing like she'd just heard the best joke of her life. Robert, the FedEx driver, back in his seat, was shaking his head slowly back and forth with an expression of profound personal revision happening in real time. Gerald Harmon stood at the edge of the stage area and looked at the 12-year-old boy who had just taken his 23 years of professional craft and, in the span of 20 minutes, with a borrowed deck in a community center on the south side of Chicago, done it 10 times in a row, each time faster, each time cleaner, without a single moment of showmanship or self-congratulation, with nothing but absolute quiet mastery. He looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then he did the only thing there was to do. He started clapping, slow at first, then faster, and he stepped forward and extended his hand. Gerald Harmon shook Marcus Webb's hand. And it wasn't the handshake of a man performing magnanimity for the crowd. It was the handshake of a man who had just had an education, and who was, to his genuine credit, willing to receive it. He held Marcus's hand in both of his and looked at him for a moment before he spoke. "Gerald Harmon, how long did you say you've been doing this?" "Marcus Webb, 2.5 years. Harmon nodded slowly. He said, quietly enough that only Marcus and the people in the first 2 rows could hear, "Then you've worked harder than I have. And I've been at this for 23 years. It was the most honest thing Gerald Harmon had said all night. And Marcus, who was 12 years old and had been laughed at and written off and dismissed and underestimated before this night and would be again, accepted the acknowledgement with the same stillness that he'd carried through the whole evening. He nodded. He said thank you. And then he walked back to his seat in the 4th row and sat down next to Miss Dot. Miss Dot didn't say anything. She just took his hand in hers. Those strong, careful hands that had raised him and fed him and held him through everything. And she squeezed it once. That was all. That was enough. The story didn't end that night. Things like this never really end at the moment they happen. They radiate outward, through time, through people, through the quiet ripple effects of a single moment when something true got demonstrated in front of witnesses. 3 people in that room that night had cameras out when Marcus performed. 2 of them posted clips online before they even got home. By the following morning, one of those clips, 27 seconds, shaky phone footage, the audio a little blown out from the crowd noise, had 100,000 views. By the end of the weekend, it had 6 million. By the following Tuesday, Marcus Webb had been contacted by 3 television programs, 2 professional magicians of genuine international reputation, and a foundation that offered scholarships to young people who demonstrated exceptional dedication to their craft. But here is what I want you to understand, and this is the part that matters most, more than the viral numbers, more than the television appearances, more than any of what came after. None of that is why this story is worth telling. It's not worth telling because Marcus Webb got famous. It's worth telling because of what he was doing before he got famous. Before anyone was watching. Before any camera was in the room. For 2.5 years, Marcus Webb had practiced in secret. In the kitchen while his grandmother cooked. In the school bathroom at lunch. Under the covers with a flashlight. reading a cracked-spine book that had been written before his parents were born, teaching himself the language of a craft that the world had given him no particular reason to believe he would ever be allowed to practice professionally. Nobody had told him he was going to make it. Nobody had given him a scholarship or a mentor or a platform. Nobody had looked at a 12-year-old black kid from the South Side and said, "Yes, you are the future of this art." He had just done the work, quietly, faithfully, repeatedly, with love. Talent is not the thing. Talent is everywhere. Talent walks the hallways of every underfunded school in every overlooked neighborhood in every city in this country. Talent is not rare. What is rare, brutally, heartbreakingly rare, is the combination of talent and belief. The conviction, held in the face of all evidence to the contrary, that what you are building in secret is worth building. That the work you are doing when nobody is watching is real work. That the skill you are developing in a borrowed library book is a real skill, worthy of the same respect as anything developed anywhere else by anyone else. Marcus Webb had that conviction. He had it at 12 years old. He had it in a neighborhood and a circumstance and a world that had given him 100 reasons to abandon it. He held on to it the way you hold on to something that is both precious and heavy, carefully, with both hands, with deliberate effort, knowing that letting go would be easier and that not letting go was exactly the point. Gerald Harmon walked away from that night changed. He has said this publicly in interviews. He said that he went home that Friday night and thought for a long time, really thought, the uncomfortable kind of thinking, about the assumptions he'd been carrying into rooms like that one, about who he'd been assuming didn't belong in the conversation, about the 23 years he had let make him complacent, and what it meant that a child with 2.5 years and a library book had forced him to reckon with that complacency. He reached out to Marcus through the community center. He offered to mentor him. Marcus, gracious, quiet, already working on his next skill set, accepted. That is not a feel-good ending. Not exactly. Because the deeper truth of this story is not that a black kid from the South Side got a white mentor and everyone learned a lesson and the world moved on. The deeper truth is the thing that happened before any of that. The truth is those 2.5 years of invisible work. The truth is that Marcus Webb built something real in a world that wasn't paying attention, and then he walked into a room full of people who had already decided he was the punchline, and he made them reconsider every assumption they had ever held about where brilliance lives and what it looks like and who it belongs to. The next time you are in a room where someone is laughing, where the crowd has already decided what the story is, already decided who doesn't belong, already decided that the kid in the corner in the too big hoodie has no business being at the table, I want you to remember this: you do not know what is in that kid's hands. You do not know what that kid has been building, alone, in the dark, for years, with nothing but faith and discipline and love for something the world hasn't yet given them credit for loving. You do not know. And if you're that kid, if you're reading this and you are that kid, the one the room is laughing at, the one who was told to sit down, the one who raised your hand anyway, I want you to hear this as clearly as I know how to say it. Keep going. Keep going in the kitchen. Keep going in the bathroom at lunch. Keep going under the covers with the flashlight. Keep going when nobody is watching, especially when nobody is watching, because the work you do when nobody is watching is the only work that's truly yours. Cannot be given to you and it cannot be taken from you. It lives in your hands. It lives in your body. And on the night when the room laughs and the spotlight finds you and you reach into everything you have built in secret, that is when they will finally understand what you've known all along. The cards were never magic. You were.